Well, as an executive, someone managed to schedule a phone meeting at the end of this. So I do have a hard stop at the end, but I'll be at the booth if you have any questions. And I'd love to talk to you about questions. So I'm here to talk to you about ethics in computing. I think in order to have ethics connect to practitioners, I need to be angry and foul-mouthed on stage. However, I am unfortunately, at this point, an American who, you're all familiar with alert fatigue. I have outrage fatigue now, after 2 years. It's hard to actually really be angry about ethical violations when they happen everywhere around me and no one seems to do anything about it in our political system. It's a huge challenge. So I will try to summon my inner anger and talk to you about this. You may have seen me in other forms. I often go in disguise. So what happens when your hair grows too fast? And one really important disclaimer, it would be very unethical for me to come talk to you about ethics and not tell you that I am not an ethicist. I participate with the ACM. I'm one of the current ACM members at large, so I sit on the advisory council for the ACM. I'm part of the ACMQ. I'm a co-chair for the ACMQ, and I'm on the ACM Practitioners Board. The ACM is the Association of Computing Machinery. It's the oldest, perhaps, depending whether you're British or not. It's the oldest computer society, and it issues the infamous Turing Award. So all the Turing Award winners are the recipients of the ACM Turing Award. So I spend my time at the ACM trying to keep the ACM relevant for everyone in this room to do their job. How can the ACM help you as practitioners? And what's very important, other than continuing content, education, curation of content, things like that, is that perhaps not being horrible fucking people would be a really good step. And in the industry, we've seen a lot of decisions that make me feel like maybe we should concentrate on that more. So this talk will create more questions than answers, and I think that that's okay. So the question is, what is ethics? All right. So when I gave this presentation in London, I was super excited that like 50% of the people had a basic concept of what ethics were. When I gave it again in the United States, I basically wanted to quit. No one seemed to understand that ethics were about right and wrong. So to be clear, ethics the philosophy of ethics is about systematizing and defending and recommending concepts of right and wrong. It's not about drawing a line. It's about how you draw the line, where you draw the line, and justifying where you draw that line so that you can evaluate what you do and the consequences of your actions in that context. And we'll get into some slightly controversial subjects, tend to be a little bit more controversial in Europe. I got accosted by someone in London that yelled at me about abortion. It was amazing. So after this is over, I have to take a phone call. If you want to yell at me about abortion, I'll be at my booth. So there are three general perspectives on ethics. And they're basically philosophies on how we deal with and how we look at systems of ethics. They are virtue ethics, which is a very small and relatively unpopular vein. There's deontology, which is basically rules and duties, basically saying the things that I do will be ethical. Right? And then there's consequentialism, which is basically the outcome of my actions should be ethical. Right? And you can imagine that you can prescribe a whole bunch of rules that sound like a great idea that kill people. So deontology is complicated. And I think it's super dangerous when we start looking at ethical things as computer scientists, and especially as people who write code. We really dig duties and rules. Like, we like fitting things into a system where we know how it will behave with a deterministic outcome. We don't like to think about the end game. We like to think about providing a set of instructions and guess what? End gaming the system, right? Like ethics, I really would rather you not game the system. That's not the point. So generally speaking, people evaluate ethics as laymen in consequential terms, because they only care how they ultimately got screwed by you, right? So ultimately, and we'll get to some examples. I could use Uber for every example, but I'm not going to. I have at least one, though, from them. So what I would say that is an easier, I think consequentialism is very difficult, and we'll get to why in our field, because we're such a young field. But virtue ethics is really interesting. The idea that you can hold kind of principles self-evidently as something that is right or wrong and try to adhere to those. So it kind of straddles the line. And quite honestly, these are all different methodologies for justifying the same thing. It doesn't change what's right and wrong. It's only about how you discuss it and how you justify it. So it's not like someone who deontologically discusses ethics and consequentially discusses ethics have to have lines in the sand that are in different places. So this is what ethics is. So perfect virtues versus continence, and understanding the importance of practical wisdom. So there are a lot of things, great example of, is it ethical to lie? One would argue, no, it is not ethical to lie. So when your mom says, do I look fat in this? And you say, yes, you look fat in this. It's probably not a really good thing to say, right? You don't want to lie, but the point there is that the virtue of not lying needs to be tempered with the outcomes and the consequences of that. So ethics is not just like, is this right or wrong? They are complicated questions. So the goal here is not to give you answers to, is this right or wrong? It's to give you frameworks for discussing and evaluating what things you're doing and how they fit in the landscape of right and wrong. Continence is the tempering of those virtues. So, change over time. So this is, I think, the most important thing, is that we all know that sneezing completely gets rid of demons, and if you don't sneeze, maybe you should bloodlet, right? Oh, wait, we're in the wrong century. So that's not how things work, right? We learn things, and those things change. So it's very interesting to look at things. People always talk about ethics, and they think about the Hippocratic Oath for medicine. And I've been asked a million times, do we need a Hippocratic Oath for computing? And my answer is yes, but we're not really ready for that yet. I might touch on why. But if you look at the Hippocratic Oath for medicine, it was really ahead of its time. But in there, in the original Hippocratic Oath, which doctors do not take really the original Hippocratic Oath, very modernized version, it basically says that you won't assist in an abortion. And there aren't doctors that do that in like most developed countries. Most developed countries have a relatively progressive stance on women's health care. It's because things change. Right? And things change in computing as well, right? So industries evolve, people's understanding of the world around them evolve, and where we draw the line between right and wrong is not the same today as it was 10 years ago or 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. Genocide didn't exist in name before 1942 or 43, right? The term was coined for what happened in World War II. It's not that those actions didn't take place, it's just that's just sensible warfare, right? You don't want somebody's kids coming after you later because they hold a grudge. You should wipe them all out, right? That just made sense 1,000 years ago, and it's morally reprehensible today, right? That is clearly wrong today. And the interesting part is that it wasn't. It was not clearly wrong 1,000 years ago. And in some remote parts of the world, it is still not clearly wrong. It's one of the reasons why bringing the world forward is an arduous task. So globalization really improves this. As we break down borders and we start working with different cultures, our progressive views on those things start to collide with each other, and it starts to move those lines forward. Scientific understanding changes that, and the supernatural belief structures that we have as they collide with each other and look similar but different and have to be both tautologically right, start to kind of devolve and start to have less influence on right and wrong. So a lot of a religious nut came up to me before and was like, that is not what God said. It was like, okay, I know. don't want to have this conversation. That's not really what this is about. What it's about is that our perspectives on how things influence society are always taken in the context of that society. So, ethics started here. There are ethicists that will argue with me, but I think in all of my research, there are more ethicists that will agree with me. So it turns out, if you can talk to God, and you can convince everyone around you that you can talk to God, there's a lot of trust someone has to put into you. So you have to make I'm going to promise you that I'm going to do this God talking and stewardship and shepherding thing in a way that positively impacts the society in which I live. And this was the reason that clergy, along with some iron fist and pokers, became very, very popular and was supported by its community. Is because there was a pact between the community and the clergy that the clergy had their best interest in mind. There were ethics there. That's what the ethics of the clergy were about, is about stewardship of the community and societal improvement. Whether that worked out is up to you. I will not comment. So medical ethics came quickly after that, and legal as well. I left legal off the slide. But so being able to represent someone who's guilty, who you know is guilty, but you don't need to disclose that they're guilty, like that sort of pact between a lawyer and their who they represent. Medical, do no harm. All of that, basically, this doctor is doing things and applying techniques you do not understand, and you have to trust that they have your best interests in mind. This is one of the biggest challenges in the United States, with doctors being able to electively participate or not participate in specific procedures based on who they service or the religion of the person they service. It's really difficult to trust that medical professional when they have their ideas in mind as opposed to your best interest in mind. So that's one of the big arguments that we consistently have in the U.S. So applying ethics. Ethics is just about right or wrong. Why do we have all of these different disciplines, right? It turns out that the promises you need to make to someone depend on the domain. Like business ethics is really different. It's about not embezzling money and keeping contracts fair. Professional ethics is about treating other people you work with dignity and respect, right? Making sure that everyone's treated equally. Those are the types of professional ethics that go in. So professional ethics are pretty universal across anyone who professes. Computing ethics, it's a problem. So why is it a problem? I think that we'll just go into some examples and try to understand why this is a problem. Because some of these we're here in Germany, so this is a great one. Some of these should just be like, what the fuck, guys? This is crazy. So, the point of an emission standard is what? To make it difficult for you to do your job? No, it's because a collective group have decided that our society is deserving of a specific goal, right? We shouldn't pollute because it's bad for the environment. We've set these emission standards. This has been adopted by multiple countries. So what's the goal there? The goal is to not pollute. It's not to game the system and beat the test. The goal is not to pass the test, right? So the VW emissions scandal, the engineers there programmed the emissions system to detect when it was in the emissions test and behave differently so that it could pass the test. And when it was driven on the road and not in the test, burn, baby, burn, right? You just burn all the diesel, let all the emissions out. All right, that's a big team. Does anybody, well, don't raise your hand. Does anybody here work with someone who could make an ethically horrible decision? Everyone. The question is, can you collectively do that together and have someone on your team not go, what the fuck are we doing? Like, this is not okay. This is not right. We have to stop here. The VW emissions team, it's not like someone snuck code into that. That was a team execution with executive oversight to completely fucking cheat and damage society by violating emissions rules. That's insane. And it's not the only place that it happened, right? Uber. I don't remember which examples I used from Uber in here, so I'll wing the ones that come up. So Uber's Greyball is actually a really interesting one, which I hope will make you think at the end of this. So Uber's Greyball, when you, anybody here not used Uber? Anybody not used Uber? Oh, some hands up. Okay, so Uber is basically like taxi on demand. You pop up the app and you say, I want to go here, and then it finds a car near you and sends it to you, and you get in and you drive off, and you don't have to pay with cash because it's all magical. It's really great. It's a nice service. Well, it turns out that certain places don't want them to operate. Say Portland, Oregon didn't want them to operate. I think they're actually illegal in Germany, or they were illegal in Belgium when I was there. I think they're illegal in Dusseldorf. Can't have Uber here. So for a variety of reasons, they need to pay taxes, you need to have a medallion, you need to have certain insurances. They don't subscribe to that, honestly, because the organization as a whole in the past has thought they were simply above the law. Also unethical. So the problem with Greyball is that what it allowed them to do is based on who you are, it allowed you to give you a different representation of where and what cars were on the map. So, for example, if you are a regulator in Portland, you can see that there are no Uber cars around. And if you are a paying Uber customer, you can see one is 2 blocks away and will pick you up in a minute. The word Greyball comes from the loaded word blackball, which is to basically label someone for exclusion. Right? It has a name that implies that it is used unethically. Right? So engineers built this system to allow Uber to disguise its real actions to evade regulation. But they didn't. That's not what they built. So Uber in certain cities pisses off taxi drivers a lot. Taxi drivers can open up the app, see where the Uber car is, and go throw rocks through its windows. They had this happen, so the Uber engineers said, we should probably not tell people exactly where cars are. That seems to endanger the safety of our drivers. So we're going to jitter them around the map a little bit. We'll change them, and certain cars will look differently. Like when you get your car, when you sign up for an Uber and it says there's a red, Mercedes going to pick you up, it better be a red Mercedes because you're looking for it. But when it's floating around, you don't actually need to know that it's a red Mercedes. It could be a black van, right? And then when you request the Uber, it could become real. So when you're not actually requesting the Uber, they could lie about what car it is, and they could move it 50 meters off. And then it's really hard to hit it with a rock because you're just not sure anymore. So it was actually built for an ethical purpose to protect the safety of drivers. And perhaps, unfortunate or not, the incredibly engineering savvy upper management under the rotting fish head of the previous CEO, who had no ethical backbone at all, decided, oh my God, we can avoid regulators with this. Right? So there's a really great example of engineers actually working on a product for basically the pure purpose of an ethical good and having their work changed to do something clearly bad. And here's one that is a little bit more existential. Autonomous vehicle operation. So in San Francisco, you need a license to operate an autonomous vehicle. So Uber was told that, and they went, and then they drove it through the city. And they drove it through red lights, and they drove it through red lights in a crosswalk near a school with elementary school students. Right? Like that's how you kill people. And you know how many engineers it takes to get an autonomous vehicle on the road? Guess what? It's not one, and it's not one team. It's hundreds of engineers that need to put this on the road that all know are aware of these issues. They're aware of the regulations. They're aware because they're in the news. As soon as somebody leaks Uber's doing this, all the news comes out about, oh, they need these regulations and this and that and the other. So all the employees are relatively informed. It takes a lot of work to actually ignore the law and put people's lives in danger in this specific case. The overarching thing, if you ask any Uber engineer that works on autonomous vehicles, and probably any engineer that works on autonomous vehicles anywhere, like Waymo or any of these, One of the leading causes of personhood death in the United States is other drivers. People die all the time in car accidents. I'll put this the worst possible way. The purpose of autonomous vehicles is to kill people, less often than people kill people. It saves lives, right? It's a really hard thing to swallow, right? But if we got autonomous vehicles everywhere on the road, and instead of 100,000 people a year dying, we had 10,000 people a year dying, it would be better. Better human lives, right? There's 90,000 people who get to continue living their lives that didn't before. People have a very hard time, including myself, with the idea that a computer is allowed to kill someone, right? So this is a hard ethical problem. Driving unlicensed through a city because I want to fucking disrupt the industry is not a hard ethical problem. So they're faced with a lot of problems. Some of them they could make a lot better, and it wouldn't be difficult. So, does anybody exercise? So Strava is like a Garmin, like a Fitbit or something like that. They basically track runs and they track bicycle rides and things like that. So this is anybody familiar with the Strava? Anybody use this? A couple people, okay. It's pretty cool. It's a neat system. So it got into the news, and I find the news part of it funny because it's like, you know, it's when somebody picked on so-and-so, and you're like, oh, that's really unfair. Well, it turns out that military people exercise a lot. And they wore this, and all of the bases that weren't supposed to be disclosed had these huge red marks of all these people running around on the Strava bitmap. And it's like, oh, they know where the military bases is. I'm like, okay, that's the last place they're going to go to pick on. Right? It's a military base. Like I know it's supposed to be secret, but at least they can defend themselves, right? The other problem is that they track bike rides. And if I look at how long your bike ride is and how long it takes, I can tell you probably with 5 to 10% error how much you paid for your bike, whether it was a $300, $400 bike or a $5,000 bike. And the end of the trail ends in your driveway. So I know exactly where to steal it. Right? It's basically a bicycle theft cheat sheet. And by default, you can obscure the last quarter mile or half mile of your trip, but it wasn't on by default. So you get to see exactly where you park your really expensive bike. And if you follow it carefully enough and siphon the data off, you can kind of figure out when's the best time to steal it. This is one of those cases where the consequences of this are really severe. And I don't know any of the Strava engineers, but I will go out on a limb to say that none of them basically had ties to black market bike liquidation. They weren't trying to plan this. So the idea of if I could slip this feature in, God, I could make so much money stealing people's bikes. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't think that this was intentional. This was basically being willfully ignorant of the potential consequences of the system. I don't think if anybody had said what could go wrong here, and they involved a diverse team in understanding what could go wrong, hackers can always find an easy way. And in usually 5 minutes at Black Hat, if you just launch an idea, they're just like, oh, that's how I'd exploit it. And you can go home and be like, okay, that's a bad idea. We should change some of these things. So to me, it's in a lot of ways, it's really building ethical decision-making into the software development lifecycle and the product development lifecycle. So as we build these products, it's not just is this code going to hurt someone? It's, is this product feature for the audience it's directed for going to hurt people, disenfranchise people? More particularly, is it going to help one audience over another one willfully? Those are the questions that we need to ask when we build things. And this is another one that's just kind of a testament to the really crappy diversity that we have in our industry. So, and this is not the only company that had this problem, but Technical Concepts built a hand soap dispenser. You put your hand under it and the soap squirts out. It's like in, I don't know, bathroom here you have to push on. But in the US, there's a whole bunch of airports and things like that that have these sensors that can detect your white hand going under it and squirt soap out. So there's a video on YouTube of this African-American, and he's like, dude, check this out. He's with his white friends, and I think they were all engineers. He's like, and then he takes a piece of white paper towel and slides it under to get the soap to come out. And it's like, and he thought it was hilarious. Not everybody thinks it's hilarious. I think more important than anything is it shows a failure of product design where we are building something, and if there was a single dark-skinned person on that product development team, that probably would never have gone out the door. Like, it's crazy. Like, I assume here that when you work on a product, you use it once before you ship it, right? You've tried it out. So if you have a diverse team, you end up eliminating all of these types of things, right? And one of the challenges that we have is that with skin color in particular, this isn't a huge issue because there tend to not be that many technical constraints that are incredibly sensitive to skin color. So if you have, a very dark skin color, a very, very light skin color, and a medium skin color, you probably cover all the bases. The problem is other products aren't so simple. Other products can discriminate against people in ways that are incredibly combinatorically explosive. There are thousands of different character traits and personality traits that people have that can make it difficult for them to use products. And the idea of having a diverse enough team to cover all of those it's nonsensical. You can't have a 1,000-person, 100% diverse team to build every single product that you do. So what this illustrates is, while this is amusing and having just a modicum of diversity in our industry would have solved this problem, this class of problems is much harder. It requires us to think about these problems purposefully when we're working on a product to understand who is the target audience for this. Why is the target audience defined that way? Should it be defined broader? Are there things about this product that need to change? Are there assumptions about our current target audience that are built into the product that someone bringing this to a new market should contemplate? Right? And this is a classic problem. Everyone who's ever tried to launch a product in another language already knows this, right? If you have a site that's in German or in English, and then you decide to launch it in Japan, you're going to learn a lot. There are so many aspects about how the product works and how it flows that are specific to the way the text is written, from right to left, and there's so many differences. And Arabic is the same way. There are so many changes to that product that have to happen. You need people to think about that. So you say, hey, this is written and it's done in a left to right, top to bottom syntax. There are considerations that we need to take into effect. There were UX and UI design principles here that probably do not apply to right to left languages. So when we bring it to that market, we need to reevaluate that. We can't just go out. Same for people who are hard of seeing, who have vision impairment, right? People who have hearing impairment. All of these things need to be considered. So it is currently acceptable to deploy a product that is localized to a region. It is not acceptable, speaking of the way society works today, it is not acceptable to deploy a product that is hard to use for people who are visually or auditorily impaired. Like in the United States, we have the ADA, which our current administration wants to go away, but is there, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act that says you can't discriminate against people with disabilities. You have to build products that accommodate them. So we've decided that the line in the sand, I support the line in the sand, is that you are wrong if you discriminate against those people. You can't discriminate against people based on the color of their skin, their religion, all of these things. We've decided that that's on the right side of the ethical conundrum. So when we develop products, we really need to evaluate those things. So the things, those should be the easy ones. You kind of have a laundry list in case law in the United States. I'm sure it's very similar in Europe. The harder ones are regional differences and cultural differences, because it is absolutely acceptable to create a product that only runs in Germany. And if you have cultural aspects of that product that are appropriate for Germany, and then you try to launch it in the United Arab Emirates, it's probably not going to work out so well, right? So you need to be mindful of that as well in product development. And the last one that I'll talk about, which is like a bomb dropping, software licensing. All right, so, I mean, it's not a week goes by. There was just the big flare-up with the Commons Clause that was introduced into something. The Redis Labs introduced the Common Clause into their modules to make it so that, like, you couldn't use them usefully. So it was no longer free to use. Software licensing is always it's a minefield. Right? You get to choose which software licenses you like. The most important part, and this is where we draw the line in ethics, and there are some, I would say, incredibly progressive thoughts that fly in the face of this, but generally speaking, when you produce product, you get to decide what license it is. And when you consume product, you get to fucking respect what license they put on it. It's that simple. It really is. And it's kind of interesting, because I stand on the other side of this than a lot of people. I won't root my phone for one simple reason. I wasn't given my phone. I bought my phone, and I signed a contract when I bought my phone that said I wouldn't do it. It's that easy. So if you would like to promise someone something and put your signature on it and then say, oh, it doesn't apply to me, I don't care, it's my right, that's an interesting choice to make, right? Life is full of choices. I've made plenty of bad choices myself, certainly questionable ones. But software licensing is about the licensing of intellectual property and work product. So when you adopt a piece of software, subscribe to the licensing. And if you do not like the licensing, you can be as angry and loud as you want about it, but it is unethical to violate it. Right? Now, everything comes with caveats. Just like in California, non-compete clauses are not legal. So if someone gives you a contract with a non-compete clause, law overrules. Right, so it's not always so easy. If there's a software license that, for example, forces you to hand over copyright, I don't believe that that's legal in Europe to force a person to hand over copyright. So that simply doesn't apply. You've already decided that is unethical to ask someone to do that, so it doesn't work. But in general, I would say that if someone is positing to you, here, have this thing under these unethical conditions, you just simply say, no, thank you. I don't subscribe to those. Those aren't ethical. I don't agree. So the software licensing thing, I'm not going to get into BSD versus GPL. The more important thing is don't use GPL code if you don't subscribe to the terms and conditions of the GPL, right? And don't use BSD code I don't even know why you wouldn't use BSD code. It's like, whatever. Or the MIT, but they have conditions and they express no warranty. Well, if you're going to insist that someone give you a warranty, you have a disagreement with someone, and it's unethical to assume otherwise. So, here's the question: is really what can we do about this? And luckily, so as a part of the ACM has had a code of ethics forever. The last revision was in 1992. And as you can imagine, with a rapidly evolving field of computer science, it was a little antiquated. So in 2018, I think 1 month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, the ACM has its revised code of ethics. So the ACM has a published code of ethics. I think it's a pretty good one. It was done through 5 iterations and a lot of public commentary from industry professionals like you. And it tells you basically what the constraints are for being an ethical practicing computer scientist. It's ethics.acm.org. So I would suggest reading it and hopefully subscribing to it, and if not, at least reasoning about it, coming up with really strong personal reasons why you agree or disagree with those certain things that allow you to guide the decisions you make so that you don't turn into a horrible person accidentally. If you're going to turn into a horrible person on purpose, I can't help you. So the question is this your responsibility? It absolutely is. These are the people, you are the people that build things that affect people's lives. The reason that this is such an emergent threat is that medicine had a Hippocratic oath after tens of thousands of years of medical practice, witch doctoring and all of that kind of stuff. And finally they adopted this when they were like, hey, this medicine thing's really catching on, right? People want to live. So computer science, if you remember, 640 kilobytes is enough for anyone. There will never be more than 18 supercomputers in the United States. Yeah, that wasn't that long ago, right? So computer science is so new. It wasn't until about 1995-ish, where computers started to impact people who didn't care about computers. And at this point, we're only 20 years later, it impacts every person on the planet, basically. So 20 years ago, the decisions we made, who are they going to affect, right? Like nobody. We use these for, decoding things, and that's it. And now every single person gets to have directions, gets to have translation and things like that. So the code that we write, the services we deploy, affect society in ways that I think that our industry is wholly unprepared for. It came on too quick. And that's still not an excuse. We have to suck it up, and we have to actually really do well. The first thing that you can do to do this is to work with people who don't think like you. Groupthink is the worst possible thing for deciding whether or not things are right or wrong. Like, build a diverse team, work on a diverse team, you get diverse thought, you get diverse questioning. And diverse questioning is the tool that we really have to guide us through all of this stuff. The last thing is dissenting, and I really wish that the ACM would just steal the document from the IEEE, but there is an IEEE document that talks about how to dissent at work when there are ethical violations. And it is a fantastic guide. It's not prescriptive, but it gives a lot of scenarios, and it talks about what you can do. And it's written from the perspective that it knows you still need to feed people when you take your salary home, which is critically important, right? You have a job when someone decides to build a weapon at work and you have a family to feed and you still need to do it. It's not as easy as just going and leaving, right? That's not an easy human decision to make. So it walks you through that. And these are the things. The first thing to remember is you're not alone in this. There are other people that are facing ethical challenges at other jobs, the current job. Understand that ethics are a spectrum. That line in the sand is much more like a very wide broom stroke, right? People already disagree on which things are right and wrong. So it is a spectrum of gray. There's a lot of gray in there. Keep records of every single thing. Every single decision that comes through, every casual objection that you have in email, all of that. Always keep records of everything. Records are admissible as testimony in the United States and in many other countries. Make sure, and this is one of the hard ones, make sure that you have a completely dispassionate defense, right? So one of the problems is that people who are making ethical violations already have the upper hand. They can have ad hominem attacks, they can fire you because they don't like you, they can do whatever you can. But in telling them they're wrong, you can never have a logical fallacy in your argument because it will always be pulled apart, and that will be the thread that they pull to unweave your argument. So the defense should be dispassionate, and it should be completely about the details. Doing this, building this, has the potential to have these consequences, and we don't have any mitigations in the software system. That is a pretty dispassionate defense of that, right? So work the system, understand your existing system, your HR, all of that kind of stuff. If you have policies, many large corporations have policies for pursuing dissent of this stuff. And in the last case is like being an apologist is no one's ever fantastic eulogy, right? Like if you're building things that are gonna, kill people or disenfranchise people, at the end of the day, you're wrong. So before the end of the day, you leave, and you don't do that. So really, it's about starting the conversation. I didn't come with answers. Came to make sure you ask questions through building software. And that's it. I have a lot of links.